here because, oh, there we go. Okay, great. So these slides are coming from our friends at CivStar. And here is, basically why we're here is because we have a chart that looks like this, right? So what we want to do is share with you some of these are some of the statistics, right? And then John and Christina, please just interrupt me if you want to jump in. We're just going to do a little bit of level setting, and then we really want to hear from everyone who is here in this session. So these are some statistics. We see that some of the entrepreneur gap, right? And especially in this Govtech ecosystem, we really want to ensure that we have more representation. Let's see, this quote, to really harness the new technology, you need to rethink the way public services work. As we move from a one-to-many to a many-to-many world, it won't do to just replicate the same old processes with new technology. And we know that when those processes are designed from one perspective, one demographic, that's who they end up serving, right? So the purpose of this session and the purpose of this work that we've done on the Inclusive GovTech Task Force is to figure out a way to help remove some of these barriers for underrepresented entrepreneurs, because we know that ultimately the more people we have involved in creating process, policy, writing algorithms, right, the more inclusive those are going to be. Nick, I see that you're back. I'm harnessing you right now and trying to do my best. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can pick up, and hopefully the refresh did its job. Great. So yeah, thank you for speaking to that. I think we were on to the ecosystem section. I can even I can jump in with the screen share again if you'd like, Judy. Thank you for taking over in the meantime.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we do want to move to getting into our jam, but I will put myself on mute and let you share why we're here and what we're
doing. Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, this is coming out of a task force, an all-volunteer task force who tried to identify some of the major barriers and strategies to better support underrepresented entrepreneurs in GovTech. Obviously, there's a whole set of problems, as I think somebody alluded to in the chat, that are much bigger societal or political strategies that you might do to bring more equity in GovTech. But we're trying to help. How can state and local governments, how can investors, how can nonprofits, accelerators, and perhaps the entrepreneurs themselves make a difference in more underrepresented entrepreneurs in GovTech. As I mentioned, so that we have a set of those initial strategies. Those can be found at inclusion.civstart.org, but try not to take yourself over there just yet, because we're going to go through a couple of them in a second. And this session is the beginning of us hopefully getting more ideas, input, and iterating on those strategies to bring them to the next step. And so we're going to briefly introduce ourselves. I know we're a couple of minutes behind because of some tech issues, but I'll go first since I'm already got the mic here. I'm the co-founder and chief impact officer at CivStart, a nonprofit startup accelerator, and we have a mission to build an honest and inclusive ecosystem. So this is really important to us to identify, do our best to help put them into practice. Christina, do you want to go next?
Absolutely, and thanks, Nick. Super happy to be here today. Christina Francis. I am the executive director of Jobs for the Future. It's Jobs for the Future Labs. Let me be clear on that. Jobs for the Future Labs is an innovation arm of a national nonprofit, Jobs for the Future. We focus on transforming corporate behavior around talent management and development. We incubate and accelerate workforce and education startups. We change the narrative of education and workforce pipelines through data. And we also have an amazing early stage investment fund where we've made already 21 promising investments in EdTech and future of work. Prior to that, I owned my own IT consulting firm. Prior to that, I spent 20 years as a management consultant focused on software development, engineering, and cyber across Govtech. And so I am here wearing that hat. I participated with CivStart. I met Anthony Jameson at a startup event and fell in love with what he was doing with CivStart and went to several events and jumped in. And I think right now we have such an opportunity to work with government, public-private partnerships to really change policy programs and see progress that we want to see. With that, I will pass it to John.
Thank you. And yes, my name is John Catt. I'm the Director of Technology Development and Data at the New York City Office of the Public Advocate. Our office, the Public Advocate's office, is a pretty unique citywide government elected office. I don't think there are many public advocate offices in big cities or even states across the country, but I am a fierce advocate, pardon the pun, for this type of office in government, because especially when government gets to be big and they're serving so many different areas of our constituencies' lives, it really behooves to have a dedicated, transparent, and third-party elected government entity that's sole position and what they do day in and day out is advocating to make sure that the public's interest is served across the board when government is implementing new things and technology is included in that. And the main reason I joined this task force is, as working in technology in the public space, I have seen too many solutions and companies and groups that do not feature, inclusivity and a wide spectrum of builders that we actually need for community-driven solutions. I don't really believe in task force. I usually am one that, believes that task force too often are put together to publish a report and say, hey, we talked about all these lofty goals and take this and do with it as you will. But much like Christina was saying, I met Anthony and was really driven by the goal of what CivStart is working towards. And when they pitched this task force and asked for volunteers, this was one where I actually saw an end goal that was worthy of working towards and lending support behind in driving inclusivity in those who are building the solutions that government's using. And I think this is a part of actually taking the task force to the level that it needs to be, taking our findings, bringing them to the public, bringing them to those who are going to be implementing them. And we want to get your feedback, get your inputs, and take this to the next iteration. And with that, I'll pass it over to Judy, who's been our MC and DJ. So
I prefer FemC. In fact, when we are talking about inclusion and representation, I do want to do one quick kind of housekeeping note. I would love for the communication to stay in chat if possible, so that we can have one place. Jeremy, I see your question here. Are you concerned about disproportionate representation among people who have the time or ability to volunteer for a task force? Absolutely. Right. And I think that that's one of the things that has brought me to this space and wanting to be part of this task force as well, or at least have some sort of insight into what individuals and organizations are thinking about in terms of how we can make GovTech more inclusive, how we can make these opportunities have broader representation for historically underinvested individuals and communities. My name is Judy Brown. I'm here as both a task force member and thank you, Sean, to help us get into this, what we're calling a strategy jam. And again, Jeremy, to your point, this is us testing what we were able to come out come up with from our own brains and our own hearts and our own experience, drawing from the experience of what Christina shared, of what John is doing as a as a public servant in this space. My firm is called Civic Makers, and we work primarily with municipalities across the Northern California mega region. I saw that there's a human-centered design facilitator here. That's what we do. We're bringing human-centered design to disciplines like strategic planning, change management, and community engagement with municipal clients. We work with some folks at the state level. I see some current and former collaborators here. I'm going to give a little wave to Niles Friedman, who is also part of the task force. Is here, yay, so exciting. So what we're going to do is share with you some of these strategies that we came up with over time. Not all of our members were always able to attend every meeting. So Nick and the CivStart team did a great job of sort of reporting back, checking our assumptions, because whomever is in the room happens to have the voice, so to speak, right? So what we're trying to do is make the room that contained our task force even bigger by sharing with you some of these strategies. And we're going to ask you to, as Nick has put here, tap in. So you can actually click share audio and video, and we can have 9 people total in this room. We're going to share the strategies and get your feedback. Does it seem feasible, viable, or desirable, what we're coming up with? And then what we'll do is, this is just version 1.0. So this is us with an outside audience for the first time, whether what came out of our minds and hearts is going to resonate. Sound good? So you're welcome to use both the chat or this tap in, share audio and video, and we can actually have you come on and share your voice and your face. JVO, I see that we're going to first share these strategies, and then we're going to ask for specific responses to the strategies. So I see you there. Let's go ahead and move to the first strategy, Nick, and JVO, if you, awesome, we got it. And if that's how you like to be called, if there's any other way you would like to be called, let me know. So I believe John is going to speak to this one.
Amazing. All right. Thank you. So part of, obviously, CivTech and GovTech is the government part of the equation. And there are so many different strategies, and we held so many different conversations around all of the key areas in which the different parties at play can help move this ball forward and change the environment itself, so that more inclusive entrepreneurs, creators, open source developers, designers can get into this space and create the solutions that our communities need. Part of this solution is de-risking government innovation. And that is a giant task. If you are in the public space, as I am, even thinking about incorporating a new technology is something that is not daunting, not scary. It's just something that we don't want to do because it involves too much, sometimes political capital, sometimes bureaucratic capital, and sometimes straight up just capital, because we don't have the necessary bandwidth to get to the point where we can try and iterate solutions in a live sense, where we're supposed to be serving constituencies. Making a government innovative solution risky is a problem, because every constituent that comes to our agencies specifically already has a problem with a government solution. So if we're testing out something, the likelihood that it goes wrong is higher with something that is not proven. And so that it causes political capital. But then when we turn around and we're trying to solve that constituent's problem and bring the other government service in, we've now just layered the issue. And so risk is the furthest thing we want in this equation. what does de-risking an innovative solution in the gov space look like? Well, we think private partnerships is one of them. Funding partnerships is one of them, where part of the capital risk is shared between private entities, private groups, along with a government entity, and then taking steps to pull out specific risk and share it across partners. Another area that we've looked at is, some of the examples of these funding partnerships are things like the Marathon Fund. Here in the city, we look at things like the fund that we looked at for, I'm forgetting the name, the CS for All initiative, which was a private and public initiative between the Union Square Ventures, a large VC corporation, and the Department of Education here in the city to get more CS education materials, curriculum, and solutions at schools across the city, not just at those that were well-funded or that had great parent fundraising apparatus. So getting private involved in assuming some of the risk in these initiatives is a key area that we see a lot of potential and a lot of appetite from both private entities, but also from government. COVID has accelerated the need for government to think outside of the box when we're talking about new technologies that we're incorporating. And now is the moment to rethink how this environment is structured and who we're including at the table when government and private entities come together and talk about de-risking, not going to just the traditional sources of creativity and entrepreneurship, but looking at the communities themselves that we're building these government services to serve. I don't know if there's a next slide on de-risking.
There isn't, but there's some good, people are starting to put some good comments in the chat.
Gotcha. I did see the one about the funding partnership.
All right, so Myling's got some good points here. Thank you. Myling is saying, a semi-random thought. I wonder if the pandemic has created a lot of opportunity for various civic tech projects because it's riskier to do nothing in a pandemic. Jill identifies with some of the mention of political risk working in the voting technology space. How do we help government see the cost of poorly functioning status quo? Molly, that's I love the framing of that question, especially in response to what JVO is sharing here as well. So let's see. Anne says, in reply to JVO, over-indexing the other side of risk becomes move fast and break things, which raises questions on who and what gets broken. Absolutely, and especially when we're talking about creating products and services that are meant to meet human needs, because this is public service, right? So that concept of risk and innovation looks a little different. Let's go ahead and shall we?
Yeah, just a quick point on one of the points, like the pandemic is offering a unique opportunity. I can speak from experience to that from a public institution now. Yeah, we did have to think outside of the box when we started telecommuting, and we started using SMS type chatbots to communicate with constituents, something we would have never even tried to implement in a normal world because there's a lot of risk associated with that. Records, how do we safeguard identity and personal identifiable information? But pandemic kind of forced us into a box where we need to think outside the box of how we communicate with constituents, and that was one such example. So that I think was a unique bell there for me.
And if I can add to that, I saw a question earlier. The government looking at how do we help government see the cost of poorly functioning status quo? I think what the pandemic has allowed all of us to do is at least get on the same, and I'm gonna use these words lightly, intellectual and kind of political space where we know that we can't do nothing. We must move forward. Where we're still, I think, influencing and shaping is what we're prioritizing to get done. But at least we're all finally unfortunately on the same page based on what's going on. So we're starting to have lots more conversation on, well, what's the art of the possible? What are other municipalities doing? What are other states doing? And so those conversations are at least happening. Some people are moving faster than others on solutioning and testing, piloting, that we'll talk about in a bit.
And so the next part of the government was, if we could move the slides to internal government innovation. Amazing, thank you. So that was the next strategy that the task force and our partners kind of mulled over, was not only, is innovation risky, but what does it look like to change the ethos of how problem solvers within government, myself included, think about government innovation? And do we have specific spaces to talk about what innovation looks like? And I can speak from experience that more often than not, government, public servants, those working on technology for the government don't have the bandwidth or the luxury to think about that. And so definitely local governments specifically can pay, we believe, much more attention to creating that space within government itself, and using that as an entry point to instill the value of a diverse entrepreneurial and innovation think space. And so internal government innovation is definitely a key area that, from experience, can lend fruit. And the pandemic is another trigger and hot point where we've been able to do things that we traditionally can't do in government, and work with government entities that we would have never thought that we could have worked with in the past, because pandemic warranted immediate action. And the cost of no action was far too great to just let an entire government service fall, because we traditionally didn't think that way, or we traditionally didn't innovate and try things and fail and move forward. So instilling, and honestly, talent is a big part of this. I more often than not go up against legacy systems, but a big part of legacy systems is also legacy talent and legacy thought processes within government itself. So part of the internal government innovation is not even technology. Part of internal government innovation is the people who are making the decisions to foster entrepreneurial growth and thought processes in an inclusive way. And without kind of changing the entire basically ecosystem of how government thinks about technology and innovation and design, because that is another huge component of this. It's not just what mainframe or data center technology is government using, but what design are they implementing to run your vaccine website? Are you thinking about all of the communities? Are the communities at that table? Well, if you had a diverse entrepreneurial system building and included in that innovation system, odds are you are going to hit more of those areas that you need to in the design and implementation and innovating that government so often fails to even begin. And I'm seeing in the chat now, huge disconnect between those making the decision in government. Like, I work in government and I plan on continuing that. So I'm not looking to make enemies with those who are deciding what technology government gets to use, but more often than not, we're butting heads with those who decide what gets to move forward, what risk we can take, how we can think about innovation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, no, there's another comment Amy mentioned. I really appreciate this one, just around the innovation team almost being siloed and not, it's great for optics, but not little impact. When organizations create an innovation arm, but don't really intend to integrate that with the culture, I think that's a huge missed opportunity, right? So one, it needs to be incorporated with the culture of the organization, of the firm, of the business. And then the second is innovation is an all hands on deck. Everyone needs to be thinking. It's a mindset, not just technology, but mindset, programs, policy, integrating that into all that you do. So I would just encourage more discussion around, what innovation means, what you're trying to change, what you're trying to improve, rather than just highlighting a team as an innovation team. It really needs to be part of the culture and the promised mission of delivery.
So let's see. We have Anne says, as someone who's on an innovation team, we see our role as deeply partnered with the rest of the government agencies. Excellent, thank you. You got 100% from Niles there, Christina, on your comment. We're going to keep going through this and continue with this chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll invite some people to share their voice and their faces with us. Does that sound good, Nick? So let's go ahead and let John introduce the next strategy, and then we'll pass it over to Christina as well. But please do keep up the chatter in the chat.
Amazing. And I will try to keep this one brief because I do want to bring some people up on stage because I'm seeing a lot of great thoughts in the chat happening. So challenge-based procurement. Procurement could have its own session, let alone its own conference, because procurement is the beast in government that no one really wants to talk about, but everyone needs to deal with. And, you know, challenge-based procurement is an idea that when I first started in government, let alone a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I would have never even tried to float, because procurement is the holy grail of political capital, where it has, you don't touch it, it's working the way it is, it's fine. You know, the large corporations that bid on everything are the only people we should be dealing with. They're enterprise, they have all of the solutions, they always have, always will. And we've seen the pandemic kind of change that. We've seen in differing areas like the Boston New Urban Mechanics office, some work in San Francisco, we see these hints and glimmers, even before the pandemic, of where you could use challenge-based procurement to radicalize how government service is provided and those who are building government services. And I think now the time is now to really push this across state, local, and I would say even federal levels, and not just in the traditional defense or large tech, you know, behemoths that government likes to spend a lot of money on. Small tech needs innovation too. You know, the front-facing receptionist kiosk designs that are being implemented are outdated and they look like they're from a 1990s kiosk mall. You know, that needs challenge-based procurement. I can imagine a myriad of different design schools in New York City or across all of our different innovation hubs that could design a 100% better system than what traditional companies, who honestly don't need to innovate because they've got their foot in the door, they've got those legacy contracts, and the government is 9.9 times out of 10 going to turn to them in a procurement sense. So I like the idea of challenge-based procurement. I think the task force did a lot of work around this. I think procurement on a whole needs a lot of change, and I'd be really interested on where some ideas on that. But we can start with the areas that aren't, you know, life or death government services to really start weeding out ways that challenge-based procurement can radicalize and revolutionize the way that government thinks about incorporating new technologies and design. And with that, I don't know if we want to hit any questions in the chat now, but I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, thank you, John. Really nice overview there. I'm just going to read out some of the, just to make sure that we are, traditional proposal writing is a huge barrier to more diverse ecosystem. Absolutely agree with that, Elizabeth. It takes so much time to respond to those proposals that oftentimes smaller organizations have a hard time getting it done. Peggy says it seems like a large part of the innovation folks' job is to build trust with and truly collaborate with the career government employees. Couldn't agree more. One can't move forward without the other. The old ways don't work, but without the SMEs, the subject matter experts, we have no internal partner. Exactly. And what we risk when we, again, kind of go out and bring in the technology or designer innovation experts is that we leave that really important institutional time and place knowledge out. Let's see, we have some really great how might we questions coming in here. How would challenge-based procurement improve equity and selection of vendors? how would challenge, but let's ask you that question, John, and then we'll move on to Christina's strategies that she's going to introduce. So Molly says, how would challenge-based procurement improve equity in selection of vendors?
I believe, and Jeremy's kind of hitting on it a little bit in the chat as well, that tying into my answer is you would, if you didn't do this intentionally, challenge-based procurement would just continue the trend of the mainstay of who's building the solutions to continue offering up and trying to solve those challenges. You also have to go to the flip side of who you're issuing these challenge-based procurements to. So focusing on the communities that are seeing these problems, and I think starting with issuing challenges of finding the actual problems that need to be solved and starting there, and not just going and saying, we as government have already identified the problems that need to be solved, and here's a challenge statement that you existing startup ecosystem should solve. Creating challenges that are more open-ended, that allow for problem statements to come to the surface that are driven by the community themselves, to then create challenge-based issues for that actual procurement of the technology, that those communities could then have a say in how they were designed, and not only in the solution space, but also in the problem space. So I think you can't just issue the challenges to an existing startup ecosystem that is and not, traditional white men. You have to change who you're speaking to with those challenges to begin with, and who is telling you the challenges are.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can add to that, Judy. Some of the best challenges that I've seen actually have criteria where you must have someone who has lived experience of that challenge on a team, or advising, or someone who's lived in the community, or requires that you partner with a community-based organization to actually even submit on behalf of the challenge. So those are just examples that I've seen that have been pretty effective.
Thank you, Christina. And we do have a new call to also bring in maintenance, make maintenance shiny and exciting when it comes to especially deferred maintenance, right? So there's a lot that we could, we're getting ourselves ready for Procurement Con here. Hopefully our CFA folks are cool with us co-creating this new conference on procurement. But I'm going to pass it over to Christina to introduce the 3 challenges that she is introducing for us to dig into.
Yes, and so okay, perfect. So access to capital. So I'm going to try and go through these quickly because I do want to get folks on the stage to walk through. But access to capital, and Judy, I love what you mentioned earlier, and you used the language underinvested individuals. I think language is important on how we describe the group of innovators that we're talking about. But Nick mentioned before a few statistics. I'm going to kind of go through them, Nick, because you were going in and out on them. And I think what you presented was really critical to this access to capital. That even pre-COVID, Black women particularly receive less than 2% of venture capital. And beyond venture, as we saw with the onset of the pandemic and major disruption to the small business community as a whole, many Black and brown firms found themselves really shut out of that initial round of PPP for many reasons. And they struggled to find funding from large institutions. And some numbers that I thought I just wanted to share and that we talked about on the task force was around 41% of Black-owned businesses across the country were shut down between February and April. And just for comparison, that's, I think, 32 for Latino businesses, 26% of Asian businesses shut down, and then 17% of white businesses. And it's hard for any business to shut down and lose its opportunity to go back to business. But I wanted to share those statistics with you. So the task force, great conversations around access to capital, and we talked about access to both social and financial. I think I saw in the chat earlier that there is a whole portion of our networks are what actually helps us to progress and scale in what we do. And so we want to talk about social plus financial capital when we're talking about access to capital. And from a task force perspective, we absolutely believe that governments, local, state, and federal, have the opportunity to provide what we're calling catalytic support. So that's in decision making, as we just talked about the challenges, it's in policy, what you actually need to do to bring a diverse subcontractor, for example, on a contract. and then funding in general. So governments have the opportunity, we believe, to create new models and infrastructure that will really support businesses. So we talked about a few things. We talked about how investors can partner with existing small businesses, help partner with active community of investors, whether that's venture capital and or angel investment groups to support underrepresented or underincluded, undertapped, underinvested entrepreneurs. And this is increasing their resources and setting up referral chain. So getting back to that social capital, or even connecting companies that could work together on a proposal, for example. We also talked about a structured way for investors to just be at the table during startup pilots. So when we do have those challenges, when we do set up opportunities for businesses to showcase, and I think I saw Belinda in the chat from AWS talking about just the AWS accelerator. Accelerators are another great place to identify up and coming promising technology and solutions. And how do we as government and the investment community bring that together to identify promising solutions for challenges. And then in the public sector, this could be managing and structuring, challenges of public interest as well. So bringing in interest of the community. We also talked a lot about integrating an equity lens and kind of diversity metrics and how that looks for investment or divestment of decision-making models. So it's not just what we're putting money into, but it's where we are potentially moving money from to put into new initiatives and opportunities. And I think John mentioned also just from a procurement, it costs to bid on contracts. So if you do have entrepreneurs or small businesses, sometimes while they may have a great idea and could contribute or respond to a proposal, it takes time, money, and other resources. And so maybe even changing that process. One other thing we talked about, and I'll pause there to see if there are any questions, is facilitating that access to capital. Governments can set up small business funds with regional, local governments and chambers of commerce, other ecosystem partners to really help bridge funding during a downturn or opportunity. And so I really want to just highlight those parts of the discussion.
Excellent, Christina. I love how in describing this access to capital, you use the term, you use decision making a few times, right? So we're not just talking, because that it's not just who's going to push forth a product, but who's really at the table in terms of how that gets implemented and how it affects residents, right? I do want to call on Nora's question. It looks like it got a +1 here. Nora says, with regards to social capital in particular, thoughts on ways for those of us new to the GovTech space to begin forming meaningful relationships with government officials. Christina, maybe you can take that, but I'm sure John might have something to say to that as well.
Yeah, what I'm finding is that government is in a position where they're asking for help. And so, county supervisors, the supervisor meetings, the Economic Development Commission and councils, show up, have your voice be heard. They are there to listen, calling government representatives, sending letters that actually still works today. I think during COVID, I've had the opportunity, and I know many people that I know have had the opportunity to sit in on Zoom calls that may not have been open to the public in the past. And so finding ways to engage in that way and then provide your thoughts. But it does, I think the comment earlier on, and I'll probably reiterate it a few times, is that it's all hands on deck. And I think everyone's position matters at this point because there's so much change that needs to happen, so much opportunity to make sure we have economic advancement for all. I would say, make your voice be heard in the places that you're finding yourself in.
Thank you, Christina. John, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting world where, again, procurement and trust comes in a little bit here, because if you're new to the government space and trust is a component, trust is currency that, is going to buy me not only time in trying to implement a solution, but also protection if something goes wrong, because it's a weird bureaucratic world that we're trying to maintain and keep our heads above water. But this is where in the task force, I think I made this point, and I hope we can get some more organizations like CivStart, because if you partner with a nonprofit accelerator like CivStart or other organizations that are in the civ advocacy space that we already have trusted partnerships with, that goes a long way and removes a lot of the necessary steps and just time getting to know and interact with you, that, you know, we can kind of hit the ground running with a CivStart at the table. So those type of organizations are growing and popping up all over the place, and it's encouraging. And I would say that is another huge area that is a good entry point to our conversations and the problems that we're facing.
All right, thank you, John. Nick, let's move to the the next strategy here, and speaking to this one as well, if you may. And Christina, this is so important and needs to be a little bit louder.
Yeah.
According
I
to
heard
what
that.
is in chat.
I normally have my headset on, so hopefully this is better. I'm gonna move close to my speaker system, my microphone system. And what I'll do is keep it brief again. I want to get some more people on stage, but I think John actually hit a lot on the proof of concepts earlier. The only addition, I just want to underscore de-risking government solutions being a critical factor here, and kind of the capital share, right? The capital share of how much it's actually going to cost, one, to test a solution. I'm thinking if it's technology, also bringing in the right stakeholders around the table costs money and time. So I believe de-risking by bringing in public-private partnerships is really important. Some of the other things that we talked about under the task force is how do we create affirming networks for companies that have not yet been able to participate in pilots, and providing them introductions and peer networks. We talked about even using proof of concepts to revamp the search and recruitment of startups and firms that could support government. And again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is setting up a referral channel and advisory board. So as we do look at paid pilots and proof of concepts, bringing in advisors from companies and firms that have scaled and grown and are successful, bringing them in to start working on that proof of concept early, so that they may be able to help those companies and or individual groups that have gotten together that aren't even companies yet, help with that proof of concept and take it to the next level. I think in terms of the RFP process, again, we talked about procurement earlier and RFIs, time, money, resources it takes. I have seen success in some municipalities allowing people to submit video, a 3-minute video, and then that municipality decides whether or not they want to invite individuals going forward. So at least that initial step has increased the number of submissions that municipalities are receiving around pilots or challenges. I think the other part is encouraging partnership. So larger companies or mid-sized companies that actually have contracts already, being incentivized to bring on startups. We see that a lot in the DoD space right now, bringing in startups to, they're calling it non-traditional contractors. And so large and mid-sized companies are required to bring non-traditional contractors in to support new challenges and pilots. So I'll pause there, again, trying to save some time so we can bring others in. Hopefully you could hear me this time. I feel like I'm so close to my computer.
We could hear you. And I also did appreciate Peggy's comment. Nick is working with local government leaders through a program in partnership with National League of Cities and Kauffman Foundation. We have 7 minutes left, so we had a couple more strategies to share with you. And in fact, there's a website that we'll drop into the chat. You can look at some of what we, if there's any of these, Nick, that you think we should kind of finish out, or if we want to invite folks to come on stage with us to share either a reflection or a question, or what they want to do to help us set up Procurement Con, that would be great. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. So this is where you can say share audio and video. if you feel so inclined to come on stage with us and just kind of talk about a particular strategy you might find for making GovTech more inclusive, or anything that you felt was missing, or anything that you were really excited about. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I don't want to override that suggestion. I think those are great. But I do also want to highlight Sean Mosley's question in the chat about if people have a recommendation for an experimentation framework to employ in the GovTech space. Certainly, as I mentioned, this is something CivStart works on, but as I saw in an earlier session today, there's no first mover advantage in the GovTech world, or in the same way that there sector. So I think having an experimentation framework saying, oh, this works, can really help potentially de-risk those innovation steps. Hello, Linda. Oh, you just muted yourself, I think.
Can you hear me? Are you able? Okay, great. Excellent. Great panel. Thanks so much, everyone, for this really important work around how to, increase the inclusion of all people in GovTech technology, especially because it's something that we really need to do. We know a lot of opportunity for improving the way our government functions. I just wanted to add a little bit of additional information. Thanks again, Christina, for pointing out that we have tech accelerator programs that can help startup founders. Instead of having to go it on your own, you can basically leverage an infrastructure like AWS, which runs Amazon.com. So when you go to a government organization and you talk about a proof of concept and say, here's something that we think would help make government function more efficiently, they're not as concerned, they're not as worried that you might create security vulnerabilities, which is really important in the government space. So we have a set of resources that we put together through our program, AWS GovTech Start, which actually helps those that are building solutions in public safety, health and human services, citizen services, election services, transportation, sectors of government agencies, and then a separate program called EdStart, which is for education technology, so for K through 12 systems and university systems and so forth. So just happy to, I put the link to both of those programs in the chat window, so if anyone wants to get more information about it, you can go there. And if you'd like to apply for either of those programs, there's not a cost for either of those programs. And if you're admitted, there's not a short period of time. You can be in the program for a long period of time, just have to be within the first 5 years of the company being founded. So that's it. Just wanted to share that information.
Thank you, Belinda. Can we give her a little wave? This is applause in American Sign Language. So we can, practice inclusion and also create some movement within our little boxes that we're stuck in. Anybody else want to come up? And Belinda, thank you. Go ahead, and we have 3 minutes remaining. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Christina or Nick or John, any response to what Belinda shared?
To jump in, at the top right, it says share video and sound. I'm not sure actually exactly what it says, but it's in the top right. It's something along those lines, and you can click on it and we'll get a notification to invite you to the panel.
Yeah, I was hoping that JVO was going to come up. I know that I saw him come.
Interested in a fellow New Yorker's. There we go.
How you doing?
Hello,
Yeah.
how are you?
Hey, Jen.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm in Minnesota now. I'm no longer a New York City guy, but I cut my teeth there.
Gotcha.
But yeah,
Once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker, we say.
that is true. I still dream of subways and the 7 line crushed in between the masses. Yeah, so, one of my biggest issues, and, I first ran into this when I was working in the budget office in New York City, is that I find that private sector development tends to create unsustainable products for municipalities and states. You know, the feds, they got endless supply of money. They can print it, right? But in terms of state and local governments, oftentimes we're restricted to a budget. And every time we build a new IT system that doesn't have allocated resources, it cuts into our human resources capital to actually provide services. And so while we can build a new fancy application, we don't have the staff then to be able to actually provide the personal services. And that's my biggest concern, and why I'm a big believer in moving to an open source government development system, you know, moving away from these proprietary, even on an operating system, developing government Linux or something like that to really save costs so we can focus more on the personnel that needs to provide the services.
I agree with, I think Nick had mentioned it before in the chat, there's definitely, you know, open source needs to be highlighted more. And as the Public Advocate's Office, we believe that open source development goes a long way towards transparency in systems. Algorithms are making so many decisions in government now, and the communities affected don't get much of a say in the creation of those algorithms, let alone the procurement side of that. And open sourcing would not only allow for a community-driven development process, but would also allow for a community transparent base for keeping us accountable when we implement these new technologies.
Yeah, and when you talk about you know, the algorithms, I don't even know what that is in a state government like Minnesota. We don't develop algorithms. We don't have the ability to do that. We're just trying to make things work. Usually on a limited budget. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So nice to see your face, see it move, hear your voice. Really appreciate all of the thoughts you added in the chat. I know that we're at time. I would be a terrible facilitator if I didn't close the loop. I put some links in the chat. I want to just really give a big shout out to Nick and CivStart for making this all possible. We'll do a little wave for Nick, and to Code for America for having us, and to you all for being here, for being engaged. And again, we dropped some links into the chat. Would love to hear this was just version 1.0. So let's co-create the next version of this together. And here's where the outro music would start playing, but I don't have it queued up.
Facilitating, Judy.
Thank you
everyone
so much, Judy, and thank you for everyone attending.
Yes. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Anissa. Thank you, Sarah. All right. That was a good one.
I am serious about Procurement Con. I don't know if anyone else is serious about Procurement Con, but I would definitely 100% get behind that.
I think we can make that a thing.
I wonder at the end of Procurement Con, there are some contracts that are signed.
Hey, I think that's a fantastic opportunity to make sure inclusion happens and accountability happens if actual contracts were signed.
Yes, and Ryan made a good point that there's a procurement session that's happening.
Oh.
At the exact same
it's
time
happening right now?
You'll have to watch the recording.
Sean will sign up for Procurement Con. That's great. So it's procurement.
I'm taking names.
Yeah, we have to reach out to NASPIO, the state procurement officials, and see if we can get something going here.
Yeah, I just looked up to see if there's a procurement conference, and they all looked a little bit boring. No offense. I think we need a bit more flash behind a procurement con.
What's boring about procurement, John?
I think it's absolutely intriguing. Most people don't agree with me, but hey, this is where all of the taxpayers' money is going. We should probably pay a little bit of attention to it.
I mean, if you think about how much corporations spend on business development for procurement and how much even before a proposal is written, it's, you know,
government relations from corporations is huge, and I think there's a reason for that. I don't know if any of this is still recorded, and I am still a public servant, so I am still on the clock, but it's a reality.
It is, and we've got to help. We've got to help small businesses get in the game, particularly those that have solutions that can work. Not just
Participatory procurement. I love that suggestion. I 100% agree with that. New York City is piloting a program now for participatory budgeting in our Department of Education funding. So the youth in high schools are now getting to have a say in where their money from the DOE is spent on what curriculum, what sports, what equipment. They're all getting a say in it now.
Maybe
John,
next
can you
year's
send me a link to that?
Yes.
maybe next year's Code for America Summit, we can have a session on that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
are Jobs for the Future
Ryan says
Labs.
noted.
Yeah, at Jobs for the Future Labs, we're actually starting our youth in residence.
Oh, very
program
interesting.
that we have for youth developing solutions for education and workforce. So awesome.
Well, we should probably end the
And what-
session so that people can go to the next one on time.
I love what Leslie said here. It'd be great to design a dynamic procurement conference dialogues on how Indigenous-owned businesses can be increasingly represented in the Canadian government procurement process. Love that. Thank you for all of these rich insights in our accidental co-creation of something called Procurement Con, which may be, a sidebar to the next CFA Summit. And I'd be remiss not to mention Marielle Reed and she was actually highlighted in the Code for America, some kind of content series, but she's doing some really cool work in that space as well. All right, I suppose we should get on with our days, huh, friends?
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Thank
you.
Thank you all.